In the heart of Nova Scotia, Canada, nestled amidst rolling hills and the vast Atlantic, lies the quaint town of Amherst. But beneath its serene facade lurks a chilling tale of unexplained phenomena that has captivated the imagination of paranormal enthusiasts for over a century. Hi folks, I'm Johnny and welcome to The Oddest. This is The Haunting of Esther Cox, a story that will send shivers down your spine and leave you questioning the boundaries between the seen and the unseen. In the summer of 1878, the quaint town of Amherst in Nova Scotia, Canada, was a place of serene beauty, with its charming houses and well-manicured lawns, home to around 3,000 people. It was a setting that seemed far removed from the sinister, but that season would prove to be the exception. The strange tale, known as the Great Amherst Mystery, unfolded on Princess Street in an ordinary two-storey timber-framed cottage. This cottage belonged to Olive and Daniel Teed, who along with their two young sons, Willie and George, shared their home with John Teed, Daniel's brother, and Olivia's three siblings, William Cox, and two unmarried sisters, Jane and Esther. The Teeds and the Coxes were a close-knit family, often seen enjoying each other's company. Esther was the youngest at the age of 18. She had a reputation for taking care of her nephews, while Olive was known for her thrifty homemaking skills. They were esteemed as good, virtuous people by everyone who knew them. However, the tranquility of Amherst shattered on the fateful day of August 28, 1878. Esther had returned home in a state of profound shock after an evening that had started innocently enough. See, she had gone for a carriage ride with Bob McNeil, a dashing young shoemaker who had been courting her. But what began as a simple outing took a nightmarish turn. Bob, with sinister intentions, drove Esther away from the safety of Amherst and into the dark woods. There, he committed a horrible act, brandishing a menacing revolver and forcing Esther out of the carriage, threatening to shoot her if she didn't comply with his requests. Esther had trusted Bob, but her trust was about to be shattered. She feared for her life as he threatened her with this revolver. Just when it seemed that her fate was sealed, the sound of approaching carriage wheels saved her. Bob hastily returned to the carriage. Drenched from the rain, Esther, trembling with fear, rushed home and hid in her room, not emerging until the following morning. For the next 4 days, Esther's family saw very little of her. She remained quiet and often spent her time outside or at neighbours' houses. Her family believed her sadness was due to a fight that she had with Bob, not knowing the terrifying truth of what actually happened to her during that carriage ride. Every night they heard her weeping herself to sleep. A week passed, and Esther's withdrawn and tearful state continued. However, something peculiar began to unfold in their house. One night, while Esther and her sister Jane were drifting off to sleep, a strange noise under the bed jolted Esther awake. She claimed it was a mouse, so the two women searched for it but found nothing. The next evening, the same noise returned. They traced the sound to a pasteboard box that was filled with patchwork, and as they dragged it out from under the bed, the box strangely leaped up into the air about a foot before crashing back down. Shaken by this terrifying incident, the sisters called for their brother-in-law Daniel. Annoyed at being aroused from his bed at that time in the night, he initially dismissed their story and he just pushed the box back under the bed. However, Jane and Esther were absolutely certain of what they had witnessed. As the days passed, the inexplicable occurrences in the house escalated. One night, Esther woke up feeling unwell and screamed at Jane, "I'm dying, I'm dying." Jane rushed to her side and was horrified by Esther's appearance. Her hair seemed to be standing on end, her face turned crimson and her eyes appeared ready to pop out of their sockets. Her hands clutched a chair so tightly that her nails actually dug into the wood. The family was called in to help, trying to guide Esther back to bed. As they struggled, Esther screamed in agony, gasping that she was swelling and would burst. In a horrifying spectacle, Esther's hands and face started to swell up, her skin burning hot, yet her complexion was deathly pale. She writhed in pain, her screams filling the room as her entire body ballooned to an enormous size. As the family grappled with Esther's mysterious condition, A loud, thunderous sound suddenly reverberated through their cottage, sending them into a panic. They believed that the house had been struck by lightning and rushed to investigate. However, there was no evidence of any lightning damage. Just as Esther's sister Olive raised the curtain to peer outside, a second, even louder noise shook the entire room. At that very moment, Esther, who had been suffering from a contorted and swollen body, strangely returned to normal and fell into a deep slumber. This terrifying incident marked the onset of a series of strange events that defied all logical explanation. Strange noises, bangs, knockings, and rustlings echoed throughout the house, leaving the family in a constant state of fear. 4 nights after Esther's swelling incident, she experienced another similar attack. Her body this time blew up to an alarming size, and she lay in bed. All the bedding seemingly leaped up from the bed, landing in the far corner of the room. It was as if an invisible hands had violently torn the bedclothes off her. When Olive attempted to return the bedding to Esther, it was yanked away once more, and even a pillow was ripped from beneath Esther's head and flung in the face of John Teed. Terrified, John rushed from the room, leaving the others to sit on the edge of Esther's bed. Their weight seemingly was the only way to keep all the bedding in place. After a few moments of chaos, the disturbance abruptly ceased, once again culminating with a loud bang that shook the entire room, and Esther returned to a normal state. The following day, the family summoned a doctor to the house in the hopes of understanding and resolving Esther's ailment. The doctor arrived in the evening, just as Esther had retired to bed. After examining her, he offered a simple diagnosis, attributing her condition to nervous excitement triggered by the recent shocks. He assured the family that there was nothing unusual happening in the house. However, just as he made this declaration, the pillow beneath Esther's head moved. It was pulled out from under her, but unlike before, unseen hands seemed to rearrange it neatly and place it back under her head. The doctor was astounded by this mystifying occurrence. John Teed attempted to hold on to the pillow with all of his strength when it moved again, but it was as if an unseen force at the other end was far stronger, and the pillow was pulled from his grasp. Following the unsettling pillow incident, the room was once again filled with unseen noises, banging, rustling, and the disconcerting sound of someone scratching the wall with a sharp instrument. Everyone's gaze turned to the wall near the head of Esther's bed, where in large letters someone had scratched the words, "Esther Cox, you are mine to kill." What occurred next was nothing short of horrifying. A sizable piece of plaster tore itself from the wall mid-flight and landed at the doctor's feet. The room resounded with loud, incessant noises, as if invisible sledgehammers were striking relentlessly, causing the entire room to shake with terrifying force. Throughout it all, Esther lay in her bed, her face etched with fear, completely unaware of what was happening to her. This harrowing scene continued for 2 hours before finally descending into eerie silence as Esther finally drifted off to sleep. The doctor witnessing these baffling events was rendered speechless, unable to offer any rational explanation for this phenomena. He promised to return the next day to provide Esther with some calming medication. However, the following evening, despite the powerful sedatives, the banging and noises were louder and more violent than ever. The doctor could even hear these sounds from outside the house, standing some 200 yards away. It sounded as if someone with heavy sledgehammers was pounding on the roof, trying to break through the shingles. When they investigated this, well, no one was on the roof, and there were no apparent cause for these sounds. As the disturbances persisted, it became widely known throughout Amherst that something profoundly strange was going on at Daniel and Olive's cottage. What's more, these manifestations were no longer limited to the nighttime hours. They started to occur at all times of the day. This phenomenon continued for weeks, with the doctor returning night after night to provide Esther with some form of medicated relief. The family began to believe that these sounds were related to an external conscious entity that could hear them and respond to their questions. On one occasion, when Daniel inquired how many people were in the room, they would hear 5 distinct knocks. Indeed, there were 5 people in the room at that moment, and Esther, unable to see due to her face being buried in a pillow, well, she couldn't have orchestrated this knocking sound. It became evident that the source of these bizarre happenings was intrinsically connected to Esther. They only ever occurred when she was in the house, and they ceased entirely when she was absent. It was as though the entity, if that's what it was inextricably linked to her. By now Esther had shared the terrifying incident that happened with Bob McNeil with her whole family, and they all agreed that somehow it had triggered these disturbing phenomena. As the strange occurrences in the house on Princess Street gained more attention, even respected witnesses like Dr. Edwin Clay, a well-known Baptist clergyman, he paid a visit to the mysterious home. He aimed to get to the bottom of these paranormal events. Just like the medical doctor who attended Esther, Clay experienced these unsettling knockings and witnessed the eerie writings appearing on the wall firsthand. He left the house convinced that Esther was not behind these manifestations, and that her family wasn't assisting her either. Instead, Clay offered a peculiar theory. He suggested that on the night of the carriage ride, the shock that Esther experienced somehow turned her into some kind of electric battery. According to his odd theory, invisible flashes of lightning emanated from her, and the knocks heard in the house were like tiny claps of thunder caused by her unusual electricity. Although this theory might sound improbable, Clay's lectures on this subject drew large audiences, and he steadfastly defended Esther and her manifestations as genuine phenomena. Other theories ran rampant in the town, with some folks convinced that Esther was a fraud, deliberately faking these occurrences just for attention. Her family strictly denied this and sought to protect their privacy. They had to call the local police several times to disperse the curious crowds that gathered outside, eager to witness Esther's manifestations all for themselves. Some even whispered that Esther had the power to mesmerise people, making them see and hear things that weren't really there. As people searched for earthly explanations, supernatural causes were also considered. But for most, the answer seemed clear. These strange phenomena couldn't be the work of any human. Instead, they believed these actions were more of an unnatural being. This belief grew stronger one night when Esther was in a different room, whispering that she could hear a voice speaking to her. She claimed this voice had once lived on Earth, but had been dead for centuries. Chillingly, it told her that it would set the house on fire that very night. Such was its power. Jane, her sister, called the rest of the household, including the medical doctor, to the room. They debated what Esther had told them when suddenly a lighted match seemingly manifested and fell from the ceiling onto the bed. The fire was quickly extinguished, but over the next 10 minutes at least 8 more matches were seen falling onto the bed and around the room. Thankfully, they were all extinguished before any harm could be done. In an attempt to communicate with the unknown entity, Daniel used knocking. He asked if the house would be set on fire, and 3 knocks signalled an affirmative answer. 5 minutes later, a fire did indeed break out in the house. It said that a dress belonging to Esther, which had been hanging on a nail near the door, was mysteriously removed, rolled up and thrown under the bed before the family could retrieve it. The fabric then burst into flames right in front of all the witnesses. Thankfully, the fire again was extinguished before it could cause any further damage. This incident, however, convinced the household once and for all that the entity within their home was of a malevolent nature. According to Esther's sister, Olive, only the devil or a malevolent spirit could commit such a terrible act as starting a fire in their cottage in the dead of night. The family's fears and suspicions were well founded. Just 3 days later, smoke was spotted rising from the cellar of the house, whilst Esther and Olive were washing dishes together up in the kitchen. Olive rushed downstairs to investigate and found a barrel of shavings ablaze, almost reaching the floor above. In their panic, both women rushed out onto the street and called for help, rousing their neighbours and even a passing stranger, a gentleman who had not been seen in the town before. This gentleman, he swiftly extinguished the fire and departed without waiting for thanks, leaving behind an air of mystery, because nobody knew who he was or where he even came from. Strangely, he was never seen again. By this point, opinions were deeply divided. Some people believed in the power of this malevolent ghost, whilst others attributed the entire case to Esther's mischief. Fire marshals suspected Esther of setting both fires herself. Some in the town cruelly suggested that a whipping might be the end to these manifestations. Esther's family, however, remained convinced of the authenticity of this phenomena, despite the fires. Esther herself couldn't bear to stay in the house any longer, as the ghost had shown her a vision of a fire in the loft under the roof that would consume them all. Fearing for their safety, Olive and Daniel, with heavy hearts, asked Esther to leave. Daniel told her, "I don't turn you out. It's the devil or a ghost who drives you from your home." Fortunately, a kind-hearted local restaurant owner called John White offered Esther shelter in January of 1879. For 3 weeks things seemed to return back to normal, but then, with an unexpected fury, this strange phenomena returned. Physical objects vanished before people's eyes, only to reappear in different parts of the room. A scrubbing brush, for instance, disappeared from Esther's hand, only to fall from the ceiling and strike her on the head prior to it hitting the floor. Furniture was violently tossed about in John White's dining saloon, and doors were lifted clear off their hinges. In one astonishing instance, a 50-pound box moved 15 feet in broad daylight without any visible cause. Throughout this period, Esther was at the mercy of this invisible entity. She claimed to be slapped, scratched and pricked by unseen hands. Shockingly, she even described being stabbed in the back with a clasp knife, which was inserted into her back, then removed, and then replaced in her back by the entity. And this happened right in front of John White's son. As word of Esther's case continued to spread, researchers and scientists approached her, eager to study and understand the strange goings-on surrounding her. Esther consented to their investigations and even embarked on a speaking tour with Walter Hubble. He was an actor and a writer with a keen interest in psychic phenomena. Thanks to Walter's meticulous record-keeping, we now have a wealth of information about this case. During this time, audiences paid money to hear her story, with scientists and scholars from across Canada and the United States personally verifying the strange happenings. However, as Esther's claims became more controversial, a riot even broke out at one of her events. Eventually, she returned to Amherst, but fires continued to follow her. She was convicted of arson after the barn of her employer burned down, leading to a 1-month jail sentence. It seemed people's patience had worn thin. Over the next few years, the phenomena gradually faded away, leaving the reason for their appearance and subsequent disappearance a complete mystery. Esther went on to marry twice and relocated to Brockton, Massachusetts, with her second husband. She passed away at the age of 52 on November 8th, 1912. To this day, the case of Esther Cox and the Great Amherst Mystery, well, it remains just that, a mystery. Was Esther a conduit for strange electrical energy, as Dr. Clay suggested? Or was she a victim of demonic possession, left emotionally vulnerable by Bob McNeil's attack? Alternatively, was it an elaborate hoax? Although the case is the subject of controversy for some, many others regard it as a genuine instance of the paranormal. It remains one of the most well-documented cases of poltergeist or possession phenomena in history, despite being understudied by modern eyes. That's it for this video, folks. Thank you ever so much for taking the time to hang out with me today. Stay safe out there, tell someone that you love them, and above all else, keep smiling.